Test.
Hey, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our regular meeting of the Westport Council for February the 5th. I would like to welcome any of our guests here tonight. And before we get into the nuts and bolts of our meeting, I would ask council and our guests, if they so wish, we'll just bow our heads in a moment of reflection. Okay, thank you. All right. The first item on the agenda then is the confirmation or the acceptance of the agenda and confirmation that it was sent out. I take it that there's no additions to the agenda. I've got a couple items under new business or other business at the end, but nothing that needs to be publicized, I don't think. So if there's nothing further, don't see anything. Okay, a motion then that we accept the agenda as presented. So we have a mover and seconder, moved by Councillor Rose, seconded by Councillor Fournier. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried. So does anybody have a conflict of interest with anything on the agenda tonight? Okay, we don't see any hands, but if you find that you're starting to get into muddy waters as we go along, declare it at that time. We have 7 items on the consent agenda. Is there anything there that anybody would like further clarification on or would like pulled and dealt with separately? And I don't see any hands going up, so a motion would be in order that we accept the consent items 4.1 to 4.6 for information and the minutes of the January 29th, 2024 regular meeting be adopted. We have a mover, Councillor Feltz, seconded by Councillor Harold. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried. Okay, we don't have any delegations per se tonight, but we do have quite a few planning items, and we've got John Weiss with us tonight to walk us through. So the first application for consent is B4623, which is 6940 line 21. So John, I'll ask you to come up and you can walk us through. Actually, you can just stay up here and walk us through them all.
Thank you, Mayor McKenzie and Council. I'm going to turn on the clicker here as Audrey has directed me to do. No red. We're good. Success. Thanks. Okay, so the first application before you today is a consent to sever for a surplus farm dwelling severance. The file number is B4623. It's owned by John Van Ness. The agent is Monteith Ritzma Phillips. It's located at 6940 line 21 West Perth, and that's just on the outskirts of Cromarty and Staffa. So the proposed severed lot would have a lot area of 0.5 hectares, which is about 1.25 acres. And then the proposed retained lot would have a lot area of 61.7 hectares, which is just over 152 acres. Before you is the sketch of the surplus farm dwelling severance. There is a barn located on the retained lands that will be removed, and that is a condition of consent. So as all surplus farm dwelling severances need, this one will need to go through a rezoning application as well. The area in yellow will need to be that's severed. That will need to be rezoned A1 to allow for a non-farm residential dwelling. And then the retained lands in red will need to be rezoned to ensure that no residential dwellings can be placed on the remaining farmland. So this is an image of the surplus farm dwelling. It's habitable and at least 10 years old. This is the image of the barn that will be removed. I believe it's the applicant's wish to remove instead of keeping it, so it will be removed as a condition. And then this image is of the shed that will remain with the severed parcel. So public notice was given on 15th of January, and no comments have been received from any members of the public at this time. I'd be happy to take any questions on this one.
Okay, thanks, John. Questions for John with regard to this application? Does the dog go with the severance?
We'll see.
Yeah. Okay, if there's no questions with regards to that application, we do have a recommendation here. And it's that the Council and Municipality of West Perth recommend that the Perth County Land Division Committee Or as designate, approve the consent application file B46-23 and that the conditions listed in the staff report dated February the 5th, 2024 be forwarded to the County of Perth Land Division Committee or as designate for consent file B46-23 affecting the property legally described as Lot 14, Concession 10, Hibbert, the east half of Lot 15, Concession 10, Hibbert, 6940, line 21. Do we have a mover for that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Foster, seconded by Councillor Vink. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. The next application then is an application for consent, and it's a file B44-23, 5472, line 49. So John, I'll let you walk us through that one as well.
Thank you, Mayor McKenzie and council. So this consent is B44-23, and it's informally known as what's called a farm split severance. The owners are Ivan and Ann Pohl, with their agent being Baker Planning Group, Carolyn Baker. It's located at 5472, line 49, and it's southeast of Moncton. So the Pohls have applied to sever 38.3 hectares, which is about 94.7 acres, for a farm parcel, and retain 46.6 hectares, or about 115 acres, at 5472, line 49. The yellow being the severed, and the red being the retained. So both the severed and retained land will continue to be used for agricultural purposes. And both parcels meet the minimum 22 hectare lot area in the West Perth zoning bylaw, as well as the 200 meters of frontage minimum. So the Perth County official plan outlines specific policies for the creation of new farm lots, which is what we see here today. Essentially, I've outlined them here on the sketch, but the first one being that farming is the intended use, which the Pohls have directed is the case here. Second, the minimum lot area and frontage requirements need to be met in the West Perth zoning bylaw, which again is the case here. And then a last point there being that each lot involved in the application must meet the minimum distance separation provisions of MDS 1 and 2. As you see on the very bottom right corner, at the corner of Road 150 and line 49, there are two MDS circles that impact the property. However, they do not impact the location of the proposed dwelling on the severed parcel and the existing dwelling on the retained parcel. That being said, the consent is considered meeting the Perth County official plan policies, and the intent is met. So this is an image of the existing dwelling on the retained lands. If we go back to this image here, it would be located in the bottom left corner. So that would be the southwest corner, and that is on the retained lands. This is an image of where essentially the best location would be for a new dwelling on the severed portion, which would be the northeast corner. This is the intended roundabout location for a proposed new dwelling if one was to be set up. Currently, there's a building permit in play for a farm implement shed. So the proponents completed a aggregate impact assessment as well, as there is an esker line that cuts through the property. The aggregate impact assessment indicated that this was tertiary significance and that there would be no negative impacts on the future availability of the aggregate resource. Planning staff are satisfied that the aggregates on the property are met. Finally, there's some UTRCA comments that we went back and forth with, just to point out that the UTRCA mapping here doesn't include all of the portion of the property in their red box. We should also include the most north easterly corner as well. But essentially, the The UTRCA comments indicate that the proposal does fragment hazard land, and that the hazard land is with a branch E of the northwest drain, as well as it fragments two areas of interference of wetlands. UTRCA does have specific policies that essentially allow for exceptions to their rule for no fragmentation, and one of them being that it's creation of more than one large agricultural parcel, which is the case here. As such, UTRCA have indicated they have no objection to the application as it meets their intent for their exception of fragmentation of hazard land policies. As such, staff are recommending approval, and notice was provided on January 15th, and no comments have been received from members of the public at this time. I can take any questions.
Okay, thanks, John. Ivan, do you have anything further you want to add at all? Okay. Any questions for John then? Don't see any hands going up. Okay, we do have a recommendation here. And it is that the municipality of West Perth recommend that the County of Perth Land Division Committee or its designate approve consent application file B4423, and that the conditions listed in the staff report dated February the 5th, 2024 be forwarded to the County of Perth Land Division Committee or its designate for consent file B44-23, affecting the property legally described as lots 1 and 2, concession 13 of the Logan Ward, 5472, line 49. We have a mover and seconder for that. Deputy Mayor Jankowski, seconded by Councillor Chessel. Any further discussion on that? Okay, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Thank you. Okay, and again, one more, John? Two more, yes, yes. Okay, floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, through you, Mayor McKenzie. These applications before you for this report are numbered B3823 and B3923. It's a numbered company as the owner, and the agent is Zelenka Priamo. The location is 29 William Street in Mitchell. You can see on the red star there. It's just on the west side of the Thames. Okay, so the application is proposed to sever 2 new lots from the subject lands for the purposes of constructing 2 new dwellings. Part 1 would be the green or bluish image, and the area is 2,471 meters squared, approximate frontage being 39 meters. And then part 2 would be through B39-23. And that area is 1,382 meters squared with a little bit of a less frontage of 25 meters. The lands to be retained are in red and are 9,250 meters squared. Essentially, the green parcel has an existing dwelling that will remain. And then they're proposing to create 1 new single detached dwelling on the yellow and 1 new single detached dwelling on the red. So the proposed new lots to be created are within the residential designation, whereas the retained land is the one that's in the residential and the floodplain designations in the Mitchell Ward official plan. Access and the extension of Nelson Street will be addressed through a development agreement with the municipality of West Perth. The development agreement will deal with the road, the access, as well as servicing, financial securities for servicing, tree replacements, the removal of a detached shed on the B39 property, as well as ensure that the owners adhere to the findings of the slope stability assessment. And that is a condition of consent, and it's through a development agreement. So the provincial policy statement outlines that development shall be directed outside of hazardous lands. The natural hazards located on the property are flood and erosion hazards. The applicant submitted a slope stability study and worked with the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority to delineate the accurate flood elevation limit. The severed lots are located outside of this flood elevation limit, as the slope stability study indicated. And the developable envelopes are feasible for each of the new lots and the retained lands as well. UTRCA has submitted comments indicating that they now have no objections to the proposals, as the slope stability assessment was to their satisfaction, and the proposed flood elevation limits are located outside of the newly created lots. So this image just shows essentially the hatched area surrounding part 1, 2, and 3 would be the developable envelopes, just showcasing that it's feasible to place single detached dwellings, as well as the image on the right, cross sections of some of the elevation changes indicated in the slope stability assessment. So the proposal is considered infill development and aids in the municipality's goal of 15% new development occurring through intensification, and that is located in the Mitchell Ward official plan. The proposal is below the 10 to 25 units per hectare density guideline in the Mitchell Ward official plan, but staff are satisfied that the proposal is adequately intensifying the site, as there are many hazard features on the lands. The lots are capable of being serviced, and the owners will be required to enter into that development agreement to access services. This image is of the first severed property, which would be B3823. As you can see, there's an existing single detached dwelling on the lands. So an archaeological assessment was completed, and it was identified during the requirements of the pre-consultation stage with the applicant. The proponents have since completed this stage 1 and 2 archaeological assessment, and that's authored by Lincoln Environmental Consulting. The archaeological assessment concluded with the findings of one isolated projectile point, which you can see on the right-hand corner. So this point was recovered during the test pit survey, and it was identified as a Lamoka from the middle to late Archaic periods, which would be 5,500 to 3,500 years ago. The isolated projectile point does not retain further cultural heritage value or interest, and as such, no further archaeological assessments were recommended by Lincoln, by the Lincoln team. It's just a neat find, I think. So notice was provided to the neighboring property owners on November 24th in accordance with the requirements in the Planning Act. No comments have been received from members of the public at this time, and staff recommend that West Perth recommend to the Perth County Land Division Committee for approval. One last thing to note, the proponents will be required to go through a zoning bylaw amendment for the B39-23 consent, as a portion of the retained lands are zoned future development. In order to develop the site, they're going to need to go to a residential. I can take any questions now.
Okay, we do also have the applicant's agent online if anybody does have any questions. No questions from council? Okay, I guess if there's no questions, we don't need to bring the agent on to clarify it. I do have a recommendation here then, and it's that the Council Municipality of West Perth recommend that the County of Perth Land Division Committee or its designate approve consent files B3823 and B3923, and that the conditions listed in the staff report for both files dated February the 5th, 2024, be forwarded to the County of Perth Land Division Committee or its designate affecting the property legally described as Park Lot 14, Plan 339 Mitchell, and Part Mill Reserve Plan 339 Mitchell, as in R99141. Do we have a mover and seconder for that motion then? Moved by Councillor Rose, seconded by Councillor O'Donnell. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Okay, moving on, John, one more here. And this one is an official plan amendment for lot 11, concession 3 of Hibbard.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor and Council. So this application is for an official plan amendment to the Perth County official plan. The owners are the Sutton Family Farms, applicant being Mark LeGroux, agent, again, Carolyn Baker of Baker Planning Group. And it's at 6856 line 26 West Perth in the Hibbert Ward. So the subject lands are outlined in red here. It's a little bit of a obscure parcel with a strange kind of configuration. Nonetheless, they are just north of Staffa. So the property is designated agriculture, natural resource environment, primary or secondary aggregate resource, and earth science ANSI in the Perth County official plan. You can see those designations. It's a little bit of a zoomed in Schedule A, so the natural environment designations are further to the north on the subject property, but you can see most of those designations on the image to the left here. The property is zoned agriculture, agriculture 2, and natural resources environment in the West Perth zoning bylaw. The A2 zone in the West Perth zoning bylaw refers to potential sand and gravel deposits identified in the Perth County official plan. So an official plan amendment is being requested to facilitate a future consent application. And this consent application would be of the surplus farm dwelling type. The owner is requesting to remove lands from the primary and or secondary aggregate resource designation and place these lands into the agriculture designation. So this change would allow the proposed severed lands, which are 0.8 hectares or 1.99 acres, access to the surplus farm dwelling policies within the agricultural designation. The aggregate, the primary and or secondary aggregate designation does not identify permissions for surplus farm dwelling severances. So that's why we need to change the designation. The earth science ANSI designation is proposed to remain unchanged. So the provincial policy statement states that in known deposits of mineral aggregate resources, development and activities which would preclude or hinder the establishment of new operations should not be taking place. The subject lands are considered as being within a known deposit of mineral aggregate resources. You can see that on the top right corner of the slide. This deposit encompasses the bulk of the selected sand and gravel resources area 5 in the aggregate resources inventory of the County of Perth, which is short form for the ARIP 175. This was produced by the Ontario Geological Survey. If anybody is wondering if they could take a look through it, I can send them a link later. The ARIP identifies that this deposit as having primary significance. As you can see, it's in red. So this deposit begins just south of Staffa and trends in a northeasterly direction, which ends in the subject lands. The owners obtained a Robert Gibson Consulting Services to complete an aggregate impact assessment for the subject lands. So the assessment indicated that if a new aggregate extraction operation were established on the proposed retained lands, that operation would be subject to the operational standards that apply to licenses in the Aggregate Resources Act. So what this means, these standards indicate that excavation setbacks from land in use for residential purposes shall be 30 meters. Got to keep that in mind when we're identifying how much land we're taking away from a primary significance aggregate resource. However, this 30 meters, if established, would sterilize the area east of the proposed surplus farm severance, which are the two white dots located at the left image by the yellow arrows. which further aggregate investigation produced by Grit Engineering has proven to contain adequate aggregate for extraction. The aggregate assessment indicated that the Aggregate Resources Act does allow for the variation of certain operational standards, such as the reduction or elimination of setback limits, screening, fencing, etc. So MNRF will require essentially an agreement between both property owners of the retained and severed parcels to allow approval of variation of this 30-meter setback. So what we're saying here is the surplus farm dwelling severance, we want to contemplate, it's not just the lands to be severed that would be sterilized for aggregate extraction. Based on the Aggregate Resources Act, 30-meter buffer would be applied as well. So we need to keep that in mind when we're talking about how much land is being sterilized by this application. However, the aggregate impact assessment concurred and said, yes, there's aggregate here. We need to reduce that 30-meter setback so that potential new pits or licensed pits that come about can access that aggregate. Any new aggregate extraction company coming in would need to go through an official plan amendment anyways to set up site on these lands. So at the time of the consent application is considered, what the aggregates impact assessment is stating is that there should be a condition of consent that showcases that both the severed and retained owners are in agreement to a reduced setback. Essentially making sure that the aggregate is able to be extracted and that the severed owners are aware of it. So I wanted to go over what an earth science ANSI is as well, because they're common in Hibbert, but in the grand scheme of things, they're fairly uncommon. So essentially, the property is within this ANSI, and it's identified as the Staffa-Kame complex. Earth science ANSIs are examples of significant representation of the bedrock, fossil, and landforms in Ontario. So essentially, they're identified by the province, and the designation is there for the Perth County Official Plan. The Perth County Official Plan does permit development within these ANSIs. Essentially, the development needs to not negatively affect the overall character and geological feature based on the policies of the Perth County Official Plan, which the aggregate impact assessment has concluded will not negatively impact the ANSI. So this is an image of the proposed severed lot that will be done in the future. And it's 10 years old and is habitable, but those consent policies will be tested upon a surplus farm dwelling application. Notice of the application was provided and a public meeting is scheduled at Perth County Council that will happen on February 15th. And at the time of writing, no comments from the public have been received. I can take any questions at this time.
Okay, thank you, John. I'm pretty sure that dog will go when that severance comes.
I think you're right.
It'll stay with the house. Any questions for John? Not OPA. No questions? Okay, we do have a
Mayor McKenzie.
Sorry. Oh, yeah.
Maybe not a question for John, but I was wondering if it be prudent that we, as the neighboring landowners, prepare a comment, because of course we own the pit right south of there, and whether or not it would be ever in our interest to expand to those lands or not, if we ever need them for gravel for our own uses.
I don't know who wants to comment on that. The thought had came to mind for me that, you know, there is a large pit across the road and, you know, that people should know that. With regards, Greg, I kind of look at you with regards to what's on the property there.
Mr. Mayor, through to the councillor, we can provide a comment just to advise that there is a pit across the road and it's owned by the municipality. And certainly that could be a minimum, I guess, a minimum statement that could be prepared within the letter. And if there was more that council was seeking in that particular document, that we would sort of look to you to provide some other comments if you think they're appropriate.
Okay, Councillor Vink? All right, so would anything like that need to be incorporated in the recommendation?
Mr. Mayor, I would suggest that you deal with the recommendation, and if you want to have as a separate direction that we write a comment that would go into this application, I think that might be appropriate. And I look to Mr. Hobson as the clerk. I think that if you separate the two pieces.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Okay, the recommendation that we have here then is that the Council of Municipality of West Perth recommend to Perth County Council that the official plan amendment number 223 affecting the lands described as Part Lot 11, Concession 5 of Hibbert, Part Lot 12, Concession 6 Hibbert, as in R376857, Municipality of West Perth, 6856, line 26, be approved. Do we have a mover and seconder for that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Phelps, seconded by Councillor Fournier. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Okay, thank you, John. So if you're going to maybe need staff direction then for that?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, staff direction, I guess we would, if council wishes for us to be on the record with a comment, I guess that's what you're looking for, Councillor Vink. And we could be directed to provide a letter to that effect.
Mayor McKenzie, yes, please. And I think included that we understand that these aggregate resources are quite valuable, being the owners of the pit across the road, and it may come a time that it is used as aggregate lands. Just to make sure that it's quite clear and that it's us on the other side of the road, and we'd also might want that on the opposite side of the road sometime, or need it for the municipality.
I'm just waiting for Dan to kind of, I know he's working on it. Got the gist of it now? Okay, I'll let you read it and then.
Just
we'll-
in a quick lump sum. So West Perth had aggregate ownership interest in the area and may be interested in expansion in the future, or
It doesn't even have to be that specific, I don't think, but yeah, something like that.
okay.
Maybe just making the property owners aware that we own a pit across the road, and kind of the same as what you've got there, just
And that aggregate resources are quite valuable commodity, and that they can expect in the future that those resources be needed.
I just liked what I had that.
go ahead.
So that the council of the municipality of West Perth direct the clerk to write a letter to the county of Perth advising that the municipality of West Perth has aggregate resources, interests in the area, and they may look to expand those resources in the future. Is that, sorry. Okay.
Okay, is everybody comfortable with that? we need a mover and a seconder, so Councillor Brink, I assume is going to move that. Seconder, Councillor Fournier. We got the two Hebert reps here. Okay, any further discussion on that? Okay, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Thank you. Okay, moving on then. Nothing from the chief building official, I don't believe. Nothing from the fire chief. And the head librarian, director of operations, better known as the CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This, I believe this report is quite self-explanatory. We have gone on, I had a conversation with Mr. Wright today that we have issued a 5-year term RFP to provide services for the landfill monitoring for this particular property. And we are recommending this particular entity to be approved to undertake those particular works. And if there's any questions, I'd be pleased to answer.
They are the firm that did it the last time, I believe.
Yes, they are, Your Worship.
Okay. Any questions with regards to that recommendation? Okay, I don't see any hands going up. So we do have a recommendation here that the municipality of West Perth award the landfill monitoring RFP 05-2023 to Pynchon Limited for a 5-year term at a total cost of $462,170, including HST, and authorize the mayor and clerk to sign and seal all necessary documents. We have a mover and seconder for that. Councillor Harold, seconded by Councillor Foster. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Okay. Moving on down, Director of Community Services. We've changed names. I got to think, who's Director of Darcy? Yes, Recreation Facilities. Yes, okay. Treasurer, anything, Wendy? I see you're back there. Nothing to report. Okay, brings us down to the clerk's report, and it's with regards to community grants. They are listed there, and you've had all weekend to look at them. Dan, do you have anything further to add?
I'll just add a couple quick highlights. Just that this is a recommendation from administration following review of the grant applications. As council is aware, this is just recommendation. Council can award any amount to anyone and put any condition on any of the awards that they wish to do so. The budget for the community grants was $34,500, and the recommendation as it sits is for $22,500. So if there's any questions or anything else, I'm happy to assist where I can.
Okay, any questions for the clerk on that, on the community grants? Okay, I don't see, Deputy Mayor Chinkowski.
Thanks, Your Worship, through you. The question for the clerk, could you elaborate on the Mount Elgin Residential School recommendation for $500? Just trying to remember how that submission or that allocation relates back to West Perth.
Oh, thank you, Deputy Mayor. So it initially come through the Heritage Committee following the presentation we had from Chief Henry Migan about reconciliation and bringing in land acknowledgement policies. From there, it was brought to council through the minutes of that committee, and council had a discussion where we received direction to include the request for $500 in this in the community grants process. So we've done so, and through review, we've included it in our recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. See no hands again. Then the recommendation is that the council municipality of West Perth approve the following community grant allocations. Mitchell Minor Sports. Do I need to read the amounts or can I just read the organizations? Organizations is fine. Broadhaven Chamber of Commerce, Opal, Fullerton Centennial Park Board, Mitchell and District Ag Society, Knox Presbyterian Church, St. Columban Soccer Club, Mitchell District High School, the food program, Mount Elgin Residential School, and then there was some discretionary funds that are left for little things throughout the year. So that's the recommendation. Do we have a mover and seconder for that? Moved by Councillor Rose, seconded by Councillor Foster. Discussion. Okay, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Any correspondence, Dan? None? Council reports, Environmental Services Committee, the water meter issue, and Councillor Harold is going to talk about that one.
Sure, thank you. On January the 17th, 2024, the Environmental Services Committee considered a matter with respect to a faulty equipment at the property on 228 Ayres Crescent. Environmental Services staff have replaced the faulty water meter. Following a discussion with staff, the committee is recommending that the wastewater fees for the property in the amount of $324 be waived due to the faulty equipment.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harold. Any questions? Would you like to move that? Okay, moved by Councillor Harold. Do we have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Phelps. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Bylaws, I don't see any. Announcements, the official plan review is taking place here on February the 7th on Wednesday. It's an open house. Forget the time. Oh, there. Yeah, but the time isn't there. Yeah. So it's later on in the afternoon. February the 15th is the Earth special shareholder meeting. The 18th is the Guns and Hoses hockey between the Perth County OPP and the fire services. February the 19th is Family Day, which is the reason why that our next council meeting will be February the 20th. Under any notices of motion? Under other business, I got a couple items there. The one is a request from Upper Thames River Conservation Authority in an application for stewardship dollars. And I'm going to ask the Deputy Mayor maybe to elaborate a little more on that if you wish.
Thank you, Your Worship. As the Upper Thames, West Perth representative for Upper Thames Conservation Authority, I was approached by a staff member, and the staff member informed me that that the authority was working on a proposal for stewardship dollars within the Upper Thames watershed, meaning that program would be available to farmers across the watershed. In addition, a focus sub-watershed would be the North Mitchell watershed, which comprises of the lands primarily in Logan Township, i.e. The lands in the watershed above the Mitchell Dam. The focus of the programming, it's proposed that the funding will be toward soil sampling, cover crops, including harvested cover crops, payments to move manure to lower soil test, phosphorus farms, erosion control, and other best management practices that would reduce erosion or phosphorus losses from agricultural land. So should the application be successful, the Upper Thames Conservation Authority is applying to, I believe it's the federal government with this application for funding. Should the authority be successful, they would reach out to all farmers and rural landowners across the watershed to make them aware of the financial and technical assistance available for implementing best management practices on their properties. So in conclusion, the staff member said in order for the application to be successful, letters of support from partner organizations and municipalities were of great benefit. And to that end, they were hoping that municipality West Perth would be willing to provide such a letter. And they've attached a draft version of the letter that they would like us to send on their behalf. And what's significant here is this proposed program would directly in line with the corresponding objectives that are contained within the West Perth Strategic Plan. That is to explore and create incentives to promote improved farm drainage, soil health, and nutrient management practices. I'd also like to remind our council colleagues that there's no cost to the taxpayer. And as a separate point of information, because this council has previously authorized for West Perth to engage in the Category 3 services from Upper Thames Conservation Authority. Because that agreement's in place, this municipality is able to benefit from this type of programming that the Conservation Authority is applying for. So on that basis, I would encourage my fellow colleagues to give support to providing this endorsement to Upper Thames River Conservation Authority so that they can proceed with applying for the project and hopefully be successful in that regard.
Okay, any questions for Dean on that? Councillor Foster?
For their cover crop program, are they looking for requirements like the Sauble does this program currently and they want, I think it's 3 or more different crops to count as a cover crop? Or are they okay with someone just using oats or red clover after wheat, for example? Or do you know?
Those details I'm not aware. I haven't been made aware of. The details of the programming would, or the details would be contained in the programming. So until the program's released, we wouldn't know exactly what the requirements are.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so then I think we would take a motion directing staff to draft a letter of support and send it to Upper Thames with regards to the stewardship program. Moved by Councillor Harold, seconded by Councillor Chessel. All those people in favor? Opposed, if any, that is carried. Oh, the other thing I had under other business, and I mentioned it to Bill Hunter today, and also mentioned it to Dan on January 31st. That was last week. Tom Phillips resigned as retired as fire station fire chief for the municipality of here in Easton. Because they control part of West Perth, he was also part of our fire services as well. So he has been with that department for 55 years. So I think it would be only fitting that as a municipality, we send a letter of congratulations and wish him well after that period of time. So again, I don't think we need a motion for that, but just for information to update you on that. So, okay, we do. I don't think there's anything else under other business. Those are the only 2 items I had. We do have a closed session. The municipality needs to proceed into a closed session and at 7:51 for the purposes of addressing a matter related to a position plan, procedure, criteria, or instruction to be applied to negotiations under the Earth Corporation. So do we have a mover and seconder to go into closed session? Counselor Vink and Counselor O'Donnell. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Okay, we had a closed session meeting with regards to an upcoming shareholders meeting for the Earth Corporation. And the mayor was instructed to be the voting member, and we selected Counselor Foster, Counselor Fournier, Counselor Harold. Oh, Counselor Phelps? No, I didn't think so. And well, Nicholas is the director, he's over there. Those were the counselors that were selected, and I believe that staff members, Wendy and Greg will be there as well. So that's who will stand in for attendees to that meeting. That wraps up what we did in closed session. Brings us down to confirmatory bylaw. Recommendation bylaw number 6, 2024, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of Corporation of the Municipality of West Perth. We read a first and second time this 5th day of February 2024. We have a mover and seconder for that. Councillor Fournier, Councillor Foster, all those in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried. And that bylaw 6, 2024, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of Corporation of Municipality of West Perth, be read for third and final time. Mover and seconder for that, Councillor Phelps, Councillor Harold, all those in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried. And finally, a motion that we do adjourn at 8:16 PM. And a mover and seconder. I'm going to take Councillor O'Donnell. And is there anybody I've missed tonight? I don't think so. Well, Councillor O'Donnell and Councillor Phelps had his name up. All those in favor?